Christians talk about the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all the time, but there is another ancient document called the Gospel of Thomas. So I printed this out, read it through, marked it up, and I'm going to share my honest reaction reading this book as a Christian. Right at the beginning, it says that these are the secret sayings of Jesus, which Thomas wrote down. Thomas was one of the 12 disciples or students of Jesus. Sure enough, the entire book is a bunch of sayings from Jesus. So it's very different from the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because it doesn't include any stories of what Jesus did. It's just a collection of sayings that Jesus is said to have said. So, side note, if you hear people pointing out that Jesus never did miracles in the Gospel of Thomas, don't be surprised. Jesus never walks in the Gospel of Thomas either. It's just not the kind of book that would include those things. What you do find is a bunch of recognizable statements from Jesus mixed in with statements you've never heard from the four Gospels. For example, Jesus said, "The kingdom is like a shepherd who had 100 sheep. One of them, the largest, went astray. He left the 99 sheep and looked for that one until he found it. When he had gone to such trouble, he said to the sheep, 'I care for you more than the 99.'" This sounds strangely like the story of the lost sheep in Luke 15, but now it has become a lesson of the kingdom. The lost sheep is the largest sheep, and there's favoritism. So what's going on here? Well, the thing about this Gospel of Thomas is that it's Gnostic. Gnosticism is a movement of people who claim to have secret knowledge of Jesus, and it was one of the first versions of Christianity 2.0 that the early church had to figure out. Again, it claims to be the secret sayings of Jesus. So you have a lot of stuff that sounds like Jesus in the four Gospels, but it often wanders off into secret Gnostic teachings. What's odd to me, however, is that I'm left wondering, what makes any of this secret? The book claims to be a collection of sayings that Jesus said to his disciples and were written down by one of his disciples. So in that sense, it claims nothing different from Matthew or John. Like if this was secret, you'd think that there would be something in the text saying, "Don't share this." And the fact that many of these sayings are basically repeat statements Jesus said in the other four Gospels, does that make the four Gospels also secret? Like, what makes this secret? I honestly don't know. So feel free to comment if you have thoughts on that. More importantly, I was seeing several ideas in this book that do not sit well with the rest of Christianity. Apart from being written down after the death of Thomas, the unusual teachings in the Gospel of Thomas are one of the main reasons that Christians have never accepted this resource as a reliable source for Jesus. It's not just that Thomas is different, it's that we have older, more reliable sources, and what's happening in Thomas doesn't line up with them. There is a higher emphasis on knowing yourself rather than knowing God. Spiritual practices like prayer and generosity are said to be harmful and sinful. Elsewhere, you get the impression that prayer and fasting are meant to fix our sin, which both contradicts what I learned and contradicts the biblical teaching. Jesus chastises his disciples for being like Jews, which is odd because Jesus and his disciples were Jews. You'll find several sayings which imply that Jesus is very mysterious or incomprehensible, whereas the Gospels talk about Jesus revealing himself, making himself known. My strongest reaction and greatest concern was in verse 70. Jesus said, "That which you have will save you if you bring it forth from yourselves." That is a false gospel. The Bible tells us plainly that salvation is not of ourselves. It is a gift from God. We were lost in sin, but Jesus came to save us. We don't save ourselves. That's Christianity 101. That's what makes the real gospel so beautiful, because the pressure's off. Jesus saves, and now we get to live for him. Given the fact that the Gospel of Thomas was written around 150 AD, which takes us past the time of Thomas and into the time of Gnosticism, it seems clear to me that the Gospel of Thomas was written to serve Gnosticism rather than preserve the real life and teachings of Jesus. I suspect that they created this document, they inserted a bunch of Jesus-sounding statements to make it appear believable, and then they presented this thing as secret knowledge, which gave it an ancient clickbait effect. One thing I found very interesting was that many of the statements in the Gospel of Thomas appear to be ripped out of context from the four Gospels, but they're not even put inside a different context. They're just there, without context. They make no sense, and many experienced readers are left baffled. What are these statements even communicating? I mean, this matters because it shows that the Gospel of Thomas was created from the four Gospels of Jesus. It's much easier to take dozens of statements out of context than to create a unified story of Jesus that puts dozens of statements into context. Many Christians will tell you to reject the Gospel of Thomas because it's Gnosticism. I think we should state this a little differently. It's not just that this writing is Gnostic, but it's that Gnosticism does not fit with Christianity. That's the important part. Gnosticism is about secret knowledge. This Gospel of Thomas is about secret sayings of Jesus. But the real Jesus never wanted any of his teachings to be kept secret. He told his followers in Matthew 28 to teach the world and observe everything he taught them. In John 18, a Jewish priest asked about his teachings. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. The book of Colossians in the Bible, Paul talks about all of these extra teachings like they are some sort of expansion pack for Christianity, but he calls them dangerous and foolish and says that the simple revealed truth of Jesus is the only diet that a faithful Christian should live by. What about the most offensive of all the verses in the Gospel of Thomas? Hands down, I think that would be verse 114. Next week, I'll be looking at that more closely. Until then, check out one of the most popular videos I did where I explain in more detail why the Christian church rejects the Gospel of Thomas as scripture. That should help fill in a lot of what didn't get said here. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.